All right, Montgomery Catholic, you want to know where the money's at? Let's talk money. You have tuned in to the financial highlight reel of your State of the School address, and you should be right here checking it out. So these numbers that you're going to see, and by the way, yes, it's not very attractive because these are financial numbers. So we're just going to look at a spreadsheet for a second. You got to remember, when we're talking about our fiscal year, we run on a calendar from July 1st through June 31st. And so even though we are almost at the end of the 22-23 school year, the numbers that we're going to see here that are actual are the 21-22 school year. So in about 3 months from now, we'll be able to update these numbers to have the actual numbers from the current school year. But when we look at, in this spreadsheet, 21-22 is going to be the number. I just say that so that we know what we're looking at. You will see the forecasted numbers for 22-23, but things can change. And most of that is predictable, but these aren't exacts just yet. It also allows us to see where we have growth and decline. And so let's start with revenue. If you see in the 21-22 school year, that first top left block there, $6.7 million in revenue, 6.6 just below it, 6.6 million in expense. So when you're looking at how much money did we bring in versus how much money did we spend, we ended on the right end of that balance point. 6.7 in, 6.6 and change out. And now look at the next column there, or the next row there in the first column, 21-22, tuition and fees revenue, $5.7 million. So $5.743.99 was brought in tuition and fees revenue. Why is that important? Well, let's look at it in perspective. The first is 5.7 out of 6.7 total revenue. So all but $1 million that came into Montgomery Catholic last year came in because of tuition and fees, which is huge. That's something to understand and appreciate when we start talking about how we are budgeting for the future. Well, we have to understand that the majority of our money comes in from tuition and fees. So if we need to increase revenue, well, then how do you do that? Unfortunately, the easiest, best way to do that is to increase tuition. And there's been a lot of conversation about Montgomery private schools increasing tuition. Well, let's point the finger at ourselves. We're not exempt. We're increasing tuition from the 22-23 school year to next year by 5%, which is an enormous outlay for our families, and we understand that. But when we look at how much money we're able to bring in, and then in a second we're going to talk about how money goes out, increasing tuition dollars to try to stay where we need to be able to cover salaries at a competitive rate for our faculty and staff is very, very important. Speaking of expenses and speaking of salaries are those teacher expenses for the 102 people on payroll is 67% of our total annual expense, 67%. So when we increase tuition by 5%, it allows us to try to stay up. Now, we've seen inflation over the last, 18 months is about 9%. We're never going to be able to meet the actual real life cost of living increase, but a 3% teacher raise is possible, and that's what we're shooting for next year. We also have to take into mind the variable tuition rate. So now if we just look up here, one more thing before we talk about variable tuition is to understand what variable tuition is. Variable tuition is like financial aid. It's allowing families who meet a certain criteria to pay less in tuition than the advertised tuition rate because of their financial ability to pay. Now, we could talk a lot about that. That information isn't new, isn't different, and is all on our website. But our families apply for variable tuition through a third-party site who then tells us, hey, this is what your families are capable of. Now, how many families are taking part in that? Well, around a third, basically. So 28% last year, and then notice that it increased this year to 31%, went up 30 students. We predict that for the 23-24 school year, that number will increase again, possibly by a greater margin. We're actually in the process right now of assigning the financial aid dollars for next year. And we have more requests than ever. Last year we saw more requests than the year before, so that's worth kind of noting there. but 220 students last year, 250 students this year were able to participate in that. Now, when you see that it's a variable tuition rate, you may say, hey, that's not fair that I pay a certain amount and they pay less. I want you to understand that a variable tuition rate may change by just a few hundred or even just a couple $1,000s. So while it's maybe $10,000 to send a student to the high school, just rough estimation, a family receiving a variable tuition rate, their rate may move because of their ability to pay from $10,000 to $8,800. Still a significant amount of money. We still have to turn the lights on. We still have to pay our teachers. There's only so much that we can do, and we've built in a certain amount of that money into our budget for each year. For the current year, we built in nearly $500,000 in aid to be able to be spread across those families as needed. In fact, we started with $450,000 and had to find a way to increase it. And next year, there's only so much that we can do. The requests remain higher than ever, but there's only so much money to go around, and so this is a fine balancing act. We are charged, I am charged, our business office is charged with taking care of our resources, being good stewards of our dollars. And this fine balance is something that I am dedicated to, devoted to, and going to continue to monitor. If we look now at our next sheet, it talks a little bit about kind of where the money comes from, how it's spent, and we mentioned already tuition. While it's a significant investment for our families at Montgomery Catholic, it is an incredibly competitive rate compared to the schools here in the Montgomery area. And so I'm not trying to, sidestep and say, oh yeah, it's a lot for us, but just look at them. But literally, when you're weighing your options, the value that you get for your dollar at Montgomery Catholic, I personally believe, is greater than any of the other options that you have, regardless of the rate or the charge that your family is facing. I mentioned this number already, but 67% of our total revenue covers employee compensation, health care, their salaries. And so those 102 folks on payroll, it takes 67% of our annual budget to cover those expenses. This is an important number, and you might think, oh, well, this should be in your student enrollment data. No, 171 students were new to Montgomery Catholic in the 22-23 school year. Here's what that impact has on our budget. It means that for every student who leaves, we have to find a new student to replace them. If you watched the first video on our enrollment and who we are on our campuses, you saw a slide about how 18% of our current families are military families, whether active duty or retired. Those 18% come and go, and hopefully are continually replaced. But when we have 171 students who are brand new at Montgomery Catholic, it makes it hard to forecast for the next year. So that come and go fluctuates as well. As we are forecasting for the 23-24 season, we are already seeing that the military output is going to be greater than those brought in. And so we're going to see a decrease in enrollment, particularly in the Holy Spirit Elementary family and the middle school and high school families. And so it's something that we have to be able to balance. 21% of the total enrollment at Montgomery Catholic this year is new to Montgomery Catholic. And some of that is kindergarten, 3 and 4-year-olds, but it's also new families coming here. Facilities is a major area where expenses have to be managed. And so let's roll into facilities, because when we talk dollars, it's important to understand that one of the major outlays, other than the 67% that covers salaries and expenses related to employment, facilities is a huge piece. Well, what facilities do we have? Well, if you haven't been around to all the campuses, this may be a little bit of surprise to you. In fact, you may be a new family at the middle school and high school and not have much of an understanding of either of our elementaries, or if you grew up through one elementary, the other may be new to you. Now, thank you, Google Maps. This is an overview here of the physical plant locations. Holy Spirit, you see Holy Spirit Church, but then the school building, which is down here, houses the classrooms. It's actually a 2-story building that houses the classrooms and a gymnasium, just under 35,000 square feet. The St. Bede Elementary campus has 3 classroom wings, one that was built in the late 90s, the new building, late 90s when I was in school there. And those 3 buildings plus the library, fine arts, and then the church allows us to share their gymnasium with them in the Family Life Center. That's about 32,000 square feet Oh, and by the way, it's over 60 years old. You know, we're coming up on a baker's dozen down here. And then built in 1965 and since is the middle and high school. So the classic building, the flat roof classic building, the gym, gymnasium, fine arts, DBC, middle school, and all come up to just under 90,000 square feet. The first was constructed in 65, the middle school in 2004, the DBC in 2008. Don't forget Belkey back there in 98, and then the new gym here in the last 5 years. All of those buildings have to be heat and cooled. They have to have interior and exterior doors. They have to have door locks. They have to, we mentioned the heating and cooling and all the air conditions and heaters and mechanical that goes with that. Between these three campuses, did you know there's over 100 exterior doors? Every one of those doors has to have the security ability to maintain the security measures that we need here at all of our campuses. 100 exterior doors with mag locks and those door strike access panels that keep your kids safe when they're in our schools. Oh, and by the way, none of that stuff is very cheap. Super expensive to maintain all these things. Just look at the roofs. Think of the square footage. All of the flooring that has to be maintained, replaced, cleaned, and updated on an annual basis. All of the desks in the classrooms. All of the walls that have to be painted every so often. So why do I say all that? I say all that because out of that $6.7 million, if 67% of it is being used to pay teachers, we're left with a small piece that has to be used for everything else. And we have to understand that these three facilities, these 4 campuses, require support, which is expensive. The building that I'm in right now had a roof put on it 2 summers ago, over $60,000 for a roof. It doesn't upgrade our look. It doesn't attract people from Vaughn Road to come and see us. It just keeps our facility going. And those kinds of costs have to be built into our budget. So what we're trying to do is to build this capital reinvestment plan where the physical plant depreciation is built into our annual budget to replace things like roofs, to replace floors, to paint walls, to buy equipment and desks. Those types of things that have not traditionally been included in the annual budget must be. That's why it's so important that over the last 6 minutes I've talked to you about this in a video that you may have already clicked off of by now. It's that important to you because it's your dollars that we're trying to be good stewards of to make all of this work. So where does your dollar go? Well, I've shared a little bit about it with the exception of the capital assessment fee. Every family, 500 plus, pays a $650 capital assessment fee to Montgomery Catholic every June. That capital assessment fee, which, by the way, no family gets away from paying that. There's no variable tuition option for the capital assessment fee. Every family pays it. And that pays for our debt service on the athletic complex. When we had a capital campaign 5-6 years ago, we built a new gymnasium and athletic complex, plus renovated the art space to where we now have choir, drama, and band practice space and storage space. That bill of almost $7 million was paid half by a loan that was taken out and half by pledges from our capital campaign, a little over $3.5 million. The debt service on that building is about $330,000 a year, a little over $25,000 a month. That payment on an annual basis is made directly from the building fund, which is where we collect our capital assessment fee. We were within about $15,000 on an annual basis of paying that kind of on a one-to-one dollar basis just out of the capital assessment fee. So we have to, why do I tell you that? I want you to know where your capital assessment fee is going, but I also want you to understand why when we do all these other building projects, where it is that we have to go find those dollars, and that's within the annual budget. And that's why when a 5% tuition increase covers a 3% salary raise and cost of living increase for our faculty, those pennies just have to be spread as far as we can. I promise you, as your school president, we're being good stewards of your dollars, but we're also very appreciative and thankful of the folks who continue to invest in Catholic education. We're always welcome to take your calls, comments, and suggestions. We are open to our families. That's why we're doing a video just like this, because we want you to know what we're doing and how you're helping us. So, in terms of facilities, in terms of finance. Thanks for tuning in. And please stick around, because if you have not checked out the video on the strategic plan to say, hey, this is where we are, where are we going to go, please be sure to check that out in your State of the School address.